I think in the next decade, I think, the awareness, the understanding around, different aspects of the green economy, whether it's, decarbonization, it's agri and food, it's bioplastics, it's supply chain. I think there's just so much awareness and so much need for new profitable business models to emerge and really catalyze change. There's a deeper awareness and a deeper purpose around the next 10 years in how do we really think about catalyzing change in different business models, which we can play a part in.
Hello, I'm Noelle Lim on ASEAN Speaks by Maybank Investment Banking Group. Inflation, geopolitical tensions and climate change are adding to global food security issues. The number of people facing acute food insecurity has more than doubled since 2019, according to the United Nations. ASEAN, as a major food producing and agriculture region, is ripe for change and innovation to step up on yields and to bolster its own food security. I speak to Ren Hua, CEO of Taiwan, on what the company is doing to be a catalyst in the agri-food sector in this region.
I think the core strategy for Taiwan Group today is really to see how we can develop capabilities and innovation from farm to shelf. A lot of our raw materials are present in Southeast Asia. So, tapioca, mung bean, and rice. And a lot of our processing and distribution capabilities really take it from Southeast Asia to the rest of the world. Currently, we have 9 operations in Southeast Asia and 4 outside Southeast Asia. And the entire company's value chain from farm to shelf is now present in 5 countries, spanning 50 locations. If we think about the value of agriculture and food, the value chain from farming, harvesting, processing, and distribution is very key. Particularly in today's world, as we think about developing new strategies to address food security and to address a growing population in different parts of the world.
What will you be focusing on to grow the business?
Over COVID, one of the big themes that we had to focus on was really about keeping the supply chain safe. Pre-COVID, we were roughly at about a $200 million, $250 million company. Over the last 3 years, we've doubled sales to almost close to $500 million in sales. So demand side for the business for food products, tapioca starch, rice products, noodle products remains very, very strong. So currently in our space in the agri-food sector, demand for food and agri-food products is very, very strong. Supply chain and distribution, I think, is going to be very critical. Clearly, as you know, in the events of the last few weeks, very disruptive on many fronts, both what's happening in Europe and Ukraine and global supply chain and tightness of supply, has really indicated to us that managing and developing a very strong supply chain throughout Southeast Asia to the rest of the world is very important. Today, we manufacture our products from 8 different locations in Southeast Asia, and we export to many different parts of the world. We are very present in China, in Taiwan, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, and also attacking a lot more business and market share in further markets such as US and Europe. So developing our distribution capabilities and supply chain, I think, will be very critical for us to grow, and we'll be doubling down on this in the near to medium term.
What's driving the doubling of sales and how can it be sustained?
Consumer appetite for consumer staple, tapioca, starch, noodles are present in every single part of whether it's in-home consumption or out-of-home consumption. Tapioca starch and tapioca-based materials are very unique in the sense that they can only be found in Southeast Asia. China has no tapioca, Europe has no tapioca, US has no tapioca. So the tapioca product, which is both grain-free, GMO-free, gluten-free, that can be used for a wide range of applications, and only found in Southeast Asia, in this part of the world, has been very unique in terms of driving demand. Of course, you have tapioca in Africa, you have tapioca in Brazil, but those are very much uniquely for domestic market and less so for export purposes. So part of it, I would say, is export-driven growth, where demand for new food applications across a range of noodles, bakeries, sauces, has really kind of led the demand for tapioca-based products in Western markets and different parts of the world that really are demanding a much more of a gluten-free, GMO-free, grain-free diet. The second thing is that over COVID, the patterns of consumer behavior between in-home consumption and out-of-home consumption continue to change. Right? During the first or second wave of lockdown, a lot of it was in-home consumption. So you saw that the demand for noodle-based products, our packaged noodle products, would then go through the roof, as people are, hunkering down for 3 to 4 months. And then subsequently, when we moved to out-of-home consumption, food service channels, hotels, restaurants, cafes, we really pioneered fresh noodles from starch base. So that's starting to grow a lot more. So really the balance, I think, in consumer patterns between in-home consumption and out-of-home consumption over the last 2 years has continued to kind of roll back and forth. But our strategy has been very much developing a portfolio of products that can suit different consumers and different needs.
You mentioned about supply chain and you're making investments, you're doubling down on that. Tell us more about what those investments will entail.
I think the end goal for many manufacturing-based companies or for companies which have a very strong or even global regional presence is really to build the supply chain as seamless as possible and ultimately to be faster, better, cheaper. Disruptions in supply chain are pretty much on a daily basis out of our control, right? A ship gets delayed, a port has COVID, cargo, gets delayed. There are many things beyond our control, but I think the ultimate goal is really to think about how can we develop a smooth and seamless supply chain to be faster, better, cheaper. A very simple example of what we are doing concretely at Taiwan is to build both, I would say, a regional supply chain. So, for example, a warehousing strategy in different parts of Thailand, to then a hub warehousing strategy in Bangkok, and then a local warehousing and distribution strategy in the different ports of China. So today, concretely in Taiwan terms as regional player from Udon Thani in Bangkok to a loading port, closer to Chonburi, to different port access in Shanghai or Qingdao, Guangzhou. We are building digital capabilities and operating capabilities to then distribute, closer to the customer. So it's really about this concept of speed and concept of just really trying to be faster, better, cheaper than the competitors that we're really after. We build warehouses, but that's mainly in Thailand. We don't build warehouses in China just simply because we can rent the warehouses. But to build an overlay of digital capabilities where we can actually track, every day, every hour, where our products in different ports in China, are they in Qingdao, are they in Guangzhou, are they in Shanghai? And from these ports, how do they then go inland into various parts of China? That's kind of the strategic milestones that we're moving towards.
So now with the COVID-19 situation in China, although they are practicing the zero COVID policy, but cases continue to emerge. And then there's the Ukraine-Russian conflict. How does this affect your supply chain part of the business?
Well, first of all, it's extremely disruptive for any manufacturing or globally based plant company simply because things are moving so quickly in ships and ports, right? So in terms of shipment delays and booking of ships, freight shipments and ports, there's a lot of volatility right now. I think how it's concretely affected us would be in two ways. The first is that globally, we are seeing, obviously, due to very rising inflationary pressures, a tightness in supply of what we call Western crops or Western-based starches. So if you think about potato, corn, and wheat, prices have just gone through the roof, over the last 2 weeks, and those are very much Western-oriented crops. For us, it's, and I think at this point, structurally net positive because you don't have tapioca in Europe, you don't have tapioca in the US. So the demand for tapioca either as a replacement, as a substitute, as a new product, I think is doing very well. And the pricing that we're seeing in tapioca, currently now in the next few weeks, continues to remain very positive and very resilient. So that's one aspect around pricing because tapioca itself is uniquely positioned and sourced from Southeast Asia, and you don't have tapioca in the Western and Northern markets. On the other side, obviously, is supply chain, right? So when we move, large bulk cargo or 40-foot containers, it's really unfolding. Intra-region trade between Thailand and China, between China and US, between Thailand and Europe is really unfolding every day. I think, currently with this supply chain shortage and crisis, companies which have scale are able to, work through this resilience and actually, keep the supply chains to be as smooth as possible. Currently, we export every day almost more than 1,000 tons of our product, or sometimes more than 1,500 tons. We're one of the largest food-grade tapioca starch into China. So our ability to at least work through this supply chain crisis, work with the shipment companies, freight companies, warehouses, port handlers, I think is quite significant. And this is a time where companies have scale, can really at least add and build their advantage to really keep the supply chain to be as smooth as possible. Because it's really about A to B to C to D, from the door to the port to the handling to the cargo container. It's really about building connectivity across different aspects of the supply chain.
What material environmental risks do you foresee given climate change?
From the very upfront, from a climate change perspective, obviously, we need to think about decarbonization at source. So it's really about farming methods, It's really about use of different NPK formulations. It's really about, for example, farm trucks, how they are thinking about use of diesel oil. So the journey to net zero, or that long-term migration of farming at source, is very critical. And we started to peel that down into different methods to allow farmers to either be more productive or more knowledgeable about how they use different inputs, particularly around fertilizers and trucks and so on and so forth. Fertilizers is a very key part of it. Again, because of the events of the recent 2 weeks, fertilizer itself is in very short demand because of phosphate and urea and so on and so forth. But I think going forward, the education around fertilizers or biofertilizers is very critical. For Taiwan, we're making active steps into that. We are launching our first generation of biofertilizers end of the year. And these are completely circularly made from our byproducts. We then blend with different innovative and naturally occurring microbes, which we could use with farmers in different parts of the region. So there are many different aspects around, I think, agriculture inputs that we can develop in the long term to help make farmers more productive. The second part of it then is obviously, or the medium-term question around, decarbonization at source, or around climate change, is productivity, because eventually a plot of land is a plot of land, right? So whether it's 1 rai or 1 hectare, if farmers over time can become more productive, either with their seed variety, with improving the organic matter at soil, with harvesting predictive analytics, if farmers can become 10-20% more productive over the medium term, then ultimately there's a net benefit because you're getting more for what they're harvesting on. So I think there are different aspects of it, and in terms of how we map out a longer term journey to net zero, currently we're quite focused at farming at source and seeing what we can do there as well. So unlike other industries or other agriculture industries, where you own large plantations, tapioca is typically a smallholder farming model. So producers and platforms like ourselves, we don't own the farm, but we work very closely with the smallholder farmers. So currently on our database, on our platform, we have about, I think, 35,000 farmers around the region. We will probably be easily doubling or tripling that to, hopefully close to about 100,000 farmers in the next 3 years. We work with farmers in Thailand, in Cambodia, in Vietnam, across a range of different initiatives and platforms. A very simple example would be, seed variety or plant variety. So even cassava or tapioca has different types of stems, and each of them have different productivity implications. So a stem or a cassava stem between, let's say, Vietnam and Cambodia, between Cambodia and Thailand, may also be quite different. Certain cassava will be more traditional, certain cassava will be more organic. We've been starting working with a very close partner in Cambodia, really pioneering the use and planting of organic cassava, where the ground, you need to be, 3 years, kind of organic, pesticide-free, chemical-free. So farming to us is something that we're very passionate about. Again, the nature of industry is we don't own the plantations, but very much we work closely with the farmers. And I would say, from 35,000 farmers, we hope to expand that to about 100,000 farmers in the medium term.
Smallholders can be more inefficient. Is there scope to consolidate land? And I'm just imagining maybe the second generation family members may not want to take over. They rather work in the city. Are you finding that as a challenge? And over time, you find you may have to consolidate some of these farms?
It's a good question, Noelle. I think, the generational transition in farming is happening, right? So the idea of that 60, 70-year-old farmer who's been plowing the land and tilling the land over the last 20, 30 years, they will probably approach the baby boomer farmer, probably now approaching Gen XYZ. That being said, in this part of the world, I think, particularly in Southeast Asia and in areas we're very familiar with, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, farmers still care a lot about the land, right? It's a source of pride, it's a source of identity. And if you think about, suburbanization, in different towns and different villages, farmers or these farmer families, they care about their land because their land, it's been their heritage for 20, 30 years. I think what will move the needle are, probably I would say, systematic initiatives. So harvesting technology is starting to change. In the past, for example, you can harvest, either through a hand or through very inefficient manual machines. Now, there are ways to actually automate harvesting a lot better, where let's say, in 1 minute, instead of either harvesting or planting 60 plants, you could do it 120 plants. So harvesting, I think mechanization will be very important because, the next generation of farmers, they're just constantly looking faster, better, cheaper methods to actually harvest and plant. Digital analytics, I think, will also change quite significantly in the medium term. We're starting to see that very concretely in India. We're starting to see that in Indonesia, where the development of new innovations in agriculture inputs and analytics ultimately can be enabling to the farmer. It could be enabling in different ways. It could be helping them to source agriculture inputs better. It could be helping them to manage the crop cycles with more information about weather and yield. It could even be helping them to make them more predictive. So these things unfold at a different pace, and I think there'll be a lot of different enabling technologies. But from my interactions and my understanding working with farmers, ultimately the land is the land, right? It's a source of pride and heritage for the farmers. So maybe the land size will shrink in certain forms, but ultimately urbanization happens in different sprouts as the country develops, up into the provinces and up into the countryside.
What about crop immunity against viruses?
So 3 years ago, even before COVID, 2018 and 2019, there was this cassava mosaic virus. So this is a virus that started 3 years ago. That then came into different parts of, first Cambodia, and then after that into parts of Vietnam and parts of Thailand. So that really happened even before COVID. It's called the cassava mosaic virus, and the origin of that was in Sri Lanka. The protection against viruses, I think, happens in multiple forms. I think the most important form is around, it sounds very basic, it's actually around farmer awareness of the different types of stems. So cassava is a tuber, right? And when you plant a tuber, there are different types, right? That's been originated from the Crop Institute and from the Department of Agriculture over the last few decades. There's like, KU50, there's like Rayong 60, there are at least, 5 to 7 different types of stems. And because of development in agronomy, certain stems are more resilient than others. So I think the first point is that generally doing a virus or just in general awareness is really educating farmers about the different stems, which stems do they have, and then switching stems where possible. So that's one insight we learned over the last few years about working with the farmers around awareness and education about different types of stems and if necessary, how to switch stems. The second thing then is that, typically the way viruses work is that they don't completely, it's not like they completely destroy all plantations. Typically a virus would reduce productivity and yield. So you can still harvest the crop. If it's a whitefly virus, it's a mosaic virus, you can still harvest the crop, but your productivity may drop, 10, 20, or worst case, 30, 40%, but the crop is still there. So the other way to mitigate against virus control would be, besides identifying the stems and, weeding out, kind of the infected areas, would be to fundamentally look at, agricultural productivity, because that's what really matters in the long term. So different aspects, right? Whether it's elements of drip irrigation, it's elements of understanding organic matter, which is very important. It's understanding fertilizer inputs. I think helping farmers in the long term fundamentally understand the different aspects of agricultural productivity is very important. Here on a structural basis, we collaborate very closely with the government agency. So in Thailand, it's called a TTDI. It's called the Thailand Tapioca Institute. They have been developing different seed, stem varieties for decades. They know the phenotypes. They know the germplasms. We work very closely with the Department of Agriculture. They know the different stems floating. So at the end of the day, it's Mother Nature, right? It's Earth is our home, plants are our home. So it's really about spreading the awareness and spreading the understanding with different farmers in different regions.
I'm reading mixed reports. Cassava is perceived to degrade soil due to high nutrient absorption. Could you help us understand this?
First of all, I think the starting point would be, looking at the underlying organic matter of every soil and understanding the pH control in different areas. Cassava itself, I think one thing about it that is very unique is that it's a 9-month crop. So it's a 9-month crop, and where water and fertilization, I think, is very important, probably in the first 3 to 4 months. So a lot of any degradation that happens, I think, intrinsically is less about the cassava itself, but it's about the handling of the starting point of what's the organic matter of the soil. And that happens over decades and decades of different farming methods, right? Whether you keep rolling it the wrong way, or, for example, the starting organic matter is not strong. Then the fertilizer part, I think it's very, very important going forward, because that also helps to increase nutriency. So, different formulations around NPK, I think, will be more and more important as time goes by. From fertilizer inputs, you've got different types of fertilizers. You've got the chemical fertilizers, organic fertilizers, and you've got biofertilizers. So we're also trying to be a lot more active and proactive. We're really driving a lot more about the organic fertilizers and biofertilizers in lieu of helping to address the organic matter of the soil. So ultimately, it's about the soil because the soil, the cassava is a tuber. So when you plant the cassava in a tuber, it grows underground, and when you harvest it, you pluck out a tuber. So the underlying, I think, organic matter around the soil, soil science, soil history, I think is very, very important.
What happens when there's a drought?
When a drought happens, you reduce the yields, but then you probably have to make up manually with addressing the water intake that the plant needs. And typically, I think it's a 9-month cycle. So from an ideal agronomy practice, you will need a significant amount of water. I think typically around between 3rd to 5th month for the tubers to grow, and then the last part is the till and the harvest. So in the event of a drought, I think the water receptivity to the plants will drop. We have to find other ways, whether it's drip irrigation to do that. The second thing, I think on a more human perspective, whenever there's a drought, then farmers may harvest at different times, because when there's a drought, then the plant may grow at a slower pace. So for example, typically if you expect the tuber or the plant to harvest in, let's say, 9 months, then harvesting methods, you may be pushed back, you may harvest within, let's say, 10 months. So these are some of the human practices that may impact as well in the event of a drought. And ultimately, it may just result in lower yields. We had this situation, I think, around 1819, right, where we saw the yields and starch content grow. It was hotter for the farmers, the plants had less water. So we just have to work through these different cycles and weather cycles.
I suppose when you have 35,000 farmers all across the region, that helps with your risk management.
Even in Thailand, we are geographically split around 7 locations. We've got a plant in Cambodia, we've got 2 in Vietnam. So when it rains, it doesn't rain all at the same time, right? I mean, rainfall happens at different times in different states. Even within Thailand, north, south, east, west, rainfalls at different types of the year. Floods, last year we had some floods, during COVID. Floods happen at different times of the year, and that's also disruptive to farmers. So yes, by and large, I think the geographical diversification helps to manage the business, right? Because when it rains or when it pours, it doesn't pour at the same time. Hopefully not.
So let's talk about some of the newer businesses, the Tapioca-based Bioplastics for sustainable packaging. The company is expecting this to account for 10% of revenue in 3 to 5 years' time. Okay, so what problem does this bioplastic solve?
Well, there's a huge problem, right? And the huge problem is that, conventional plastics, we need to think faster, better, cheaper, and find different ways. The big problem statement is that, how do we use plant-based materials to convert it into bioplastics or biodegradable and compostable materials. So that's the starting point of because the problem is so large and so looming, at least this conversion and this value creation has to be somewhat significant. We started this tapioca-based bioplastics. Our internal brand name is called Roseco. Rose is the name of our heritage brand for our B2B ingredients, and eco stands for ecological prosperity. So Roseco, ROSECO, that's our bioplastics brand. We started, Roseco, I think about 2.5 years ago, because we clearly saw the need for, I would say, bioplastics or plant-based bioplastics. And then along the way, when we looked at different technologies, biopolymers, both fossil-based and plant-based, we discovered that, hey, tapioca clearly has a role to play. The role that tapioca-based bioplastics can play in bioplastics is really around certain key applications and certain key segments. Again, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach where you don't have one particular product that can solve everything, right? Different types of bioplastics or biopolymers have different structural grades, mechanical properties, cost, so on and so forth. Where we are positioning our tapioca-based bioplastics, I think is very clear. The first is obviously the origin and the consistency of raw material. So it comes from our farms and our farmers. So throughout the year, we really understand the consistency and the provenance of the raw material. The second of all is that functionally, I think it's very well suited for certain applications around sustainable packaging, around flexible film, around certain applications that need elongation. So for example, you think about shrink wraps, you think about bags, you think about multi-layered packaging, anything around elements of flexible packaging, sustainable packaging, food service, I think it's got a very big role to play, and we're starting to compound it with other biopolymers and other ingredients as well. And then the third and final point will be around cost effectiveness. Bioplastics today is obviously still more expensive than conventional plastics. Although today's PE petroleum prices are so high, in some ways it makes bioplastics even more affordable, relatively speaking. But the tapioca-based bioplastics, because it starts from a plant-based perspective, we already have access to the raw material, the value chain, the cost equation, and is somewhere in the range of $1 to $2 per kilo. Other biopolymers you're looking at, PHA, PLA, PVAT, they're upwards of $2, $3, $4 a kilo. So the cost function and the price value equation for this particular project is also very important as well. So these are the three things. I think it's about the raw material supply chain, it's about the functional properties around flexible film, sustainable packaging, and finally it's about the cost value equation and something which is a lot more affordable. Of course, even if we can make a 1% contribution to this plastics crisis, 1% of I think it's something like 700 to 800 million tons of conventional plastics every year. That's really a huge impact for a small to medium-sized business like ours.
Where will this bioplastic sustainable packaging be exporting to? Do you find Europe is the natural market, or are you finding an interesting market growth in ASEAN?
Again, we see different trends, right? Different countries are moving towards regulatory policy on different time schedules and different migration trajectories. But by and large, our internal view is that by 2024, 2025, which is essentially 2 to 3 years, I think the ban on single-use and conventional plastics, I think will accelerate a lot more. So we're starting to see that in China happening. I think in Thailand, they're already weeding out at the retailers level around single-use bags, single-use plastic, so on and so forth. So a lot of it, I think, will happen as the pace of regulation moves towards governments taking a stronger stance on different elements of conventional plastics. In the first phase, obviously, next 1 or 2 years is very much an ASEAN market. So our customer base, where they will develop new applications such as new types of films and packaging and bags, will be around Southeast Asia. But clearly, I think the market will be very much global. So in China, we definitely see strong demand for our type of product, and in Europe and US as well.
The other potential high-growth business is Taiwan Ventures to invest in seed to pre-A investments. I understand this is the first corporate B2B food and agri platform in the region, and you want to spot the next generation of Tyndall and growth well. Tell us more about it.
I think for this decade, I think the confluence around agri-food, sustainability, and profitable business models, I think it's incredible. If you look at the last decade, just across business, I think so much of the last decade was around software, tech, e-commerce, so on and so forth. But I think in the next decade, I think the awareness, the understanding around different aspects of the green economy, whether it's decarbonization, it's agri and food, it's bioplastics, it's supply chain. I think there's just so much awareness and so much need for new profitable business models to emerge and really catalyze change. So I think for us, there's a deeper awareness and a deeper purpose around the next 10 years. How do we really think about catalyzing change in different business models, which we can play a part in? Specifically, back to Taiwan Ventures, we are looking at 4 core areas of innovation where we'll be working, partnering, and scaling with startups. 4 key themes, which are very much close to heart of what we work with and deal with on a daily basis. The first is ag, farm and ag innovation. So I talked about working with the farmers, whether it's around agriculture inputs, biofertilizers, new farming methods. A lot of innovation in smallholder farming, and farm innovation and farm tech will be one key theme which we're looking to partner and work with some of the best startups in the world. And we're really working with some traction now with folks in India, folks in Indonesia, and folks in Thailand. The second will be around B2B supply chain analytics. So B2B supply chain, much of it is digital, but it's also more deeply about looking at different aspects of the value chain and trying to create change. So it could be around analytics around aspects of supply chain. It could be around IoT, around reducing post-harvest loss. It could be around digital penetration and mapping of traditional trade channels. There are many different aspects around B2B supply chain analytics. And typically, it will be around elements of reducing waste, increasing speed, and thus ultimately value to the customer. The third is around bioplastics. I spoke about it earlier. Bioplastics, not just ourselves, but there are many partners, startups, innovators in the region. We're looking now at talking to folks and partners in the US, in Australia, in China. And as bioplastics unfold, I think, catalyzing and working with, folks in this area and actually developing new innovative technologies will be very exciting. And finally, will be novel ingredients, so plant-based. It could be different starches, it could be different crops. We've been looking at mung bean, we've been looking at organic rice, we've been looking at Red Sea rice, raw ingredients that help to strengthen our overall portfolio of products for Taiwan as a leading B2B agri-food player would definitely be something that we hope to incorporate either in terms of a new technology or a new product. So by and large, Noelle, a lot of it is thematic that, over the next 10, 20, 30 years, agri-food as a space will continue to grow. And defining Taiwan Ventures is really focusing on these few themes where we feel we can make a difference in terms of a deep understanding of the technology, markets, and ultimately the customer.
So I was reading up some of the criticism about Agritech ventures. For example, one says it merely replaces the middleman who can be quite powerful. The returns from farm technology can be difficult to reap. Farmers are scattered and there are many smallholders. And then land is a state matter in many countries, I think Malaysia, for example, and all that complicates developments or progress. So in light of this, looking at that 4 buckets that you mentioned, which do you think will give you the low-hanging fruits at this point in time?
So I think by virtue of being a corporate venture capital fund and a corporate venture, we are able to take a longer-term view, actually understand those trade-offs that you mentioned, right? Whether it's trade-offs on actually to the middleman or trade-offs to agriculture inputs. I think by virtue of Taiwan Ventures actually being a corporate, obviously we want to make sure that the business model is profitable. We want to make sure there's an exit. We want to make sure that they scale. But we can really take a longer-term view because ourselves, Taiwan, we're a long-term company, right? We are a 75-year-old company going on 100. So intrinsically within our own DNA, we are already long-term and we understand the issues around scaling, understand the issues around creating more innovation. So that's the first point about our own purpose in this, and just taking a longer term view. But going back to your point around what is low-hanging fruit, frankly, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit right now that we are not investing in. So there's a lot of technology that are relatively not very deep in terms of the technology and the science. So it could be an app, right? A simple app base, it could be a simple digital dashboard, it could be something. So the low-hanging fruit are those which are relatively light on technology. We wouldn't actually want to invest because we don't think that there's a deeper innovation purpose and cycle. So I think it's on the contrary, we're not actually looking for the low-hanging fruit. We're actually looking for companies which have a deeper element of innovation. And that can come in different forms. Science is a very big part of it. So again, if you're talking about whether it's microbes or genomes or material science, the scientific part about the innovation could be a new type of bioplastics with a deeper understanding of the material science formulation. It could be a biofertilizer with a different set of microbes and enzymes leading to formulation. It could be a B2B supply chain with elements of AI. So I think the underpinning the source of innovation to science technology, I think, is a very, very big part of what we are trying to do and trying to build. The second part of it, which is very exciting, is talent. I've been in Taiwan not for a long time. I've been here 6 years, so I've learned a lot. But in my 6 years here, since I came to merge the two, Taiwan Food and Taiwan Starch, the amount of talent, entrepreneurs, VCs, innovators pouring into agri-food, agri-tech, food tech has accelerated, over the last 3-4 years. And this comes with new talent, right? Engineers, scientists, marketeers, business development. A lot more people are really seeing that this could really be a transformational space. So it's very exciting. I think, yes, the criticism there will always be trade-offs. It's ultimately about taking a long-term view with a deeper understanding of the source of innovation and really being, really energized about the amount of talent that's coming into the space right now.
Well, in the digital world, you go big or you go home. Which part of the agri-tech ecosystem excites you? Or where does Taiwan have the most right to win or see the most value?
I think it's the up to midstream. So in a very simple terms, downstream would be supply chain and customer, end user customer. So we serve Unilever, Nestle, Walmart, P&G. So we serve as ingredients, as a B2B companies to customer or consumer, right? So the way I think about our world, at least Taiwan's world, is in very simple, very broad buckets. Is downstream, customer, consumer, supply chain. Midstream, which is processing, classic manufacturing, processing, value add, innovation technology, but processing, that's midstream. And then upstream is essentially from farm to factory, right? So working with the farmers, agriculture inputs, soil productivity. What excites me the most, which is really who we are, And what we want to be, it's really about the midstream and upstream. If I think about innovation in the food space, there's so much stuff going on downstream, right? You can have like 15 different types of burgers and 45 different types of chocolate bars and 1,000 SKUs. And you've got some great retailers, right? You've got everything from Whole Foods to Nestle so the downstream part, I think the world is, in my view, quite mature. And I think there's been so much stuff going there right now. I mean, the only, you can have like literally 100 different burger patties and 1,000 different SKUs, and you'll continue on the downstream part. The midstream part, I think there's a lot of stuff that can still be done because we do have, I think, a responsibility to see how we can be more productive, we can be more efficient, we can use innovation technology. But the connection in our space between the upstream, what farmers are doing in the midstream, I think is quite profound. And I think it's quite important around the long-term stability and resilience of supply chain. So that's what motivates me. That's what motivates us, right? That, how do we develop new business models around the long-term resilience, around supply chain from farm to shelf? How do we work closer with farmers to really either increase productivity, increase yields? How do we link, between areas? Which is why at the end of the day, we will and we are going to be a Southeast Asia agri-food company because our upstream and midstream are in Southeast Asia. The farmers are here in Cambodia, and Vietnam, and Thailand. The customers are global, but the midstream and upstream developing capabilities, developing innovation is what I think, really motivates us the most.
Are you looking at any ventures in Malaysia or even your home country, Singapore?
Well, my home country in Singapore has an incredible amount of innovation. We don't have that much land unless it's vertical. But yeah, we're doing quite a lot of stuff in Singapore, working with partners, but it's very much around science and technology, less about building a factory. But I think Singapore is an incredible source and an ecosystem for talent, innovation. Malaysia as well, we actually are exporting quite a bit of our food products into Malaysia. I would love to go, but over the last 2 years, I've just traveled between Singapore and Bangkok.
Okay, for a company transitioning from one CEO to another, it might not be easy, especially for people who have worked in the organization for a long time and are used to a certain way of doing things. How do you move people along?
I've had to learn to humbly try to transform myself over the last 6 years. Again, I don't think I'm doing a perfect job. So the last 6 years, I think there were probably 2 phases of my own career. First phase is what they call the Freshmen Ceo Phase. I came in 2015 as a fresh CEO. I was involved before that with our other family-listed company, Banyan Tree. I was helping to lead and build the China business. But in 2015, 2016, there was a chance to merge, Taiwan, which was then a $50, $60 million company into a $150, $200 million company. So the freshman phase, the rookie CEO was, I would say, 2016 to 2019, where you learn the basics of leadership. And a lot of it is around building a team, a lot of it is around learning the business, and then really defining an agenda for the next 5 years. So that was the first phase, I think, of myself. The second phase is obviously, something that no one, could ever predict or anticipate, right? Being a so-called COVID CEO or being a wartime CEO is probably the best experience ever. There's no playbook. Everything gets thrown around. We are lucky to be in a space, agri-food, where demand is still very, very strong. But over the last 2 years, I think, my own concepts of leadership, leading through crisis, leading through change, empowerment has really been, clearly just learned by doing. I think, being a CEO and having both the emotional resilience and the agility to really lead through 2.5 years of COVID has been a very, very powerful experience. I'm very grateful and very proud to my team. The same executive team has been with me for 6 years. Our board of directors is incredibly strong now. We've got 4 ex-CEOs on our board. The management team that we built over the last 3-4 years is pretty much 100% retained. So I think as a CEO, it's just constantly looking forward, seeing around corners, reinventing yourself, building the team. And for me, I'm just really grateful that COVID has been an incredible learning sandbox, and we just need to start from that base and go forward.
In 5 years' time, where do you see the company in terms of market capitalization?
5 years' time, okay. So, market cap, I think in 5 years' time, I mean, it could be double, it could be triple. I think we have no false illusions to be, a sexy, high-tech unicorn. We have a very deep purpose that we feel will resonate with investors. So honestly, in 5 years' time, it could be 2, it could be 3 times. Well, so if it's 3 times, we're going to be $1 billion company. If it's 2 times, we're going to be a $750 million company. So honestly, in 5 years' time, I think it could very well, in our space, with our track record over the last 6 years in delivering cumulative EBITDA, in delivering dividends, it could be 2 times or 3 times. So that's one aspect of it. And whether it goes 2 times, 3 times, it will be what it'll be. What is more important is, I think, is companies, or at least the CEOs, need to really know who they are. If we start making the wrong decisions and trying to grow too fast, it leads to a lot of challenges, right? You've got margin issues, you've got culture issues, you've got friction issues. If we try to grow too slow, then you're not keeping up the change. Agri-food is clearly a long-term play with medium-term milestones. I think over the next 3 years, you will see some very concrete shifts into our strategy and results around bioplastics, around Taiwan ventures, around growing Indonesia and Vietnam. I'm absolutely convinced and incredibly excited that within 2 to 3 years, we'll deliver on those milestones. But that being said, it's really a medium-term play. I mean, it's really not like software or tech where every 3 months, 6 months, you keep on growing, pivoting. And a deep understanding of agri-tech and agri-food and the patient is very important because we're working with farmers, we're working with soil, we're working with products. We're ultimately, a platform product company. So while, on one hand, yes, I think in the next, 5 years, we may double or triple market cap. I think what's more inspiring to me is just staying true to the purpose and growing in a very steady and sustainable way. In the last 6 years, we've mentioned this in analyst investors, we've accumulated more than 2.5 billion of EBITDA. We've distributed back to shareholders more than 1.2, 1.3 billion baht of dividends. The share price has obviously, since every company gets hit by COVID, the share price has outperformed with 2.5x since COVID. And over the last 9 months, the share price has climbed probably almost 50-60%. That being said, I mean, I don't know where the market cap will be 5 years from now. I do think it will be a multiple of today, but the DNA of the company is incredibly, incredibly important. And that's one big lesson I've learned from COVID, is just staying true to who you are and just keep on building.
Thank you for speaking to us.
No, thank you, Noelle. It's been a pleasure and appreciate the time.
Ren Hua, CEO of Taiwan. I'm Noelle Lim on ASEAN Speaks by Maybank Investment Banking Group.